Chair, if I could also ask Ken Payne to come up with me at the moment, too, I'd appreciate that.
I don't see why not. Ken Payne? Ken.
Thank you very much, and it's too bad we've lost some of our committee members. Unfortunately, finance is a harsh mistress in pulling a lot of members off of the down into finance a lot of times from this committee. But 7904 has really been a labor of love and probably frustration too for me. For folks again that are not aware, I've been working for a number of years on a bill around carbon. Really working on reducing our carbon footprint here in Rhode Island. Back in 2008, I introduced a bill called the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was also introduced in Massachusetts and I believe a couple other states at the same time. Massachusetts actually passed that bill that year. We've never been able to get it over the hurdle here. And last year I had it in again and had done a lot of modifications, but I'd also had a real growing anxiety about our lack of sort of concerted, focused effort around really responding and preparing for climate change. Between the 2010 floods that Rep. Palumbo and I certainly had a lot of folks. I know Rep. Walsh, the whole state. We really got pounded in 2010, and that was basically just a storm. It wasn't even, but it stuck and it stayed and it kept raining and it caused tremendous damage and tremendous flooding. Folks may remember I-95 and that incredible site, and I know we've got other folks that are going to talk about their experiences a little bit around even that, but fundamentally that, and then you add in Hurricane Sandy, and actually it was just a tropical storm when it hit us up here too along the way, and what a small difference it could have made into turning that into making us the New Jersey and Long Island that happened along the way. I know I've heard the statistic that New Jersey lost on the order of 360, or maybe it's 390,000 homes. I don't remember the number exactly. Rhode Island has about 410,000 homes. Basically what New Jersey lost was Rhode Island in terms of number of homes. We could have been that. And so that level of anxiety has been building up. And I've been somewhat cautious to try not to be the harbinger of doom that makes everybody want to run away every time they see me coming because they're afraid I'm just going to tell them these awful stories about about climate change and what we have to do. But what I feel like I've had an opportunity to do too is to really find the silver lining here. I don't know if Paul Carroll is here. Oh, excellent. So I'm hoping he can reflect a little bit on his vision, but it's visions like his, I think, are really the key here. He's going to talk a little bit, too, about taking advantage of an opportunity. Where there's a crisis, there's an opportunity. I know Rep. Palumbo has started looking at sort of the green sector as a place to look at for work and looking at a place to expand his career. I think similarly, the state can look in this kind of a direction as well. We have a serious threat. And where that threat is, we need to respond. But when we respond, we also have an opportunity to be the place that we create the technologies, to be the place where we test the technologies, frankly, but also to be the place where we realize that through planning, careful planning, we can come out the other side much stronger, as opposed to what tends to happen now. And I think folks know what happens now. We've done it in Cranston. I know I've seen it in Block Island even, where Block Island had a road that got washed away, I believe, when Sandy, not the early floods. And they had a much better plan for how to replace that road, but the plan had not yet gone through all the vetting and all that kind of stuff along the way. So they had to rebuild the road the old way because that's how they had to proceed. If instead you planned ahead, you did the vulnerability assessments that this bill would call for, and you started planning in a optimistic fashion, let's say a clear-headed fashion. So it's not necessarily optimistic because you're going to say we're going to lose that again. We know that's going to get washed away again. Misquamicut, other places like that, they know things are going to get washed away again, but we still keep rebuilding them. Why don't we instead know at the other side what we need to put there that's smart, that's resilient, that prepares us, that prepares our economy and our businesses and our residences to protect them. The key components of this bill, I think I might let Ken kind of go through some of the pieces of the bill more carefully because I'm going to leave out big pieces. But what my vision is that Rhode Island government, from the school committee all the way up to the state, would switch to a new business as usual, where we don't even have to try to remember to think about resilience. It's there. It's in our DNA, if you will, as we move forward. So that when we're coming out of things, when somebody's doing a blueprint, when somebody's even thinking about writing a blueprint, they've already factored in a lot of that stuff along the way. So that's my vision on this. But in this, I think it's got some key pieces. One, throughout the findings and things like that, you see that clearly we want to make sure to really emphasize that climate change is real. It's happening. 98% of climate scientists are absolute on this. The reason I gave you guys those props up there was, I've got other versions. Let me see if I can actually show the things here along the way, because I really, the first one that Rep. Palumbo has, let me see if I can get that up on there a little bit. There we go. This is a 1930-ish cover of a coloring book that Dutch Boy did for girls and boys. Now, if you look at what it says on there, it says the Dutch Boys led party, and in the background there's kids' toys and mirrors and other random little things. Inside the one that Rep. Palumbo has, it actually goes so far as to encourage, essentially, you to take the nice white lead paint and add pigment to it to paint children's rooms, and I would infer children's toys like hobby horses and things like that. And that's like 1930, maybe 1920s. Again, I'm not busting on the current paint industry, but I'm busting on the guys that did this, because almost 30 years before that, Europe had already banned lead paint. This is going into children's rooms. We all know what we're dealing with here in Rhode Island today, 75, 80 years later, 90 years later. That same type of thinking is happening with the climate change science. There's also stuff up there, tobacco industry, doctors, all doctors, or more doctors agree that this tobacco product is better than that one, R.J. Reynolds and so forth. They all use those things. And again, I don't want to pick on anybody in particular at the moment, but rather to say the exact same behavior we saw then is what we're seeing now. People trying to say the science is unclear. The science is unclear. It is not. The science is very, very clear. Climate change is happening, it's real, and it's a threat to us. What we don't know is exactly what's going to happen. Just as I don't know whether it's going to rain next Friday, I barely know if it's going to rain tomorrow, even when I look at the weather along the way. Imagine trying to predict the exact things. What we do know what's happening, we know the evidence is clear. There is consensus in the scientific community on that. So I want to make sure I put that out there as explicitly and as fundamentally as I could. But with that threat, again, are the opportunities. I think this bill, all it really looks to do is set in place the planning blocks for the state to look to prepare for climate change. We ask for vulnerability assessments. We ask that when we're spending money on things like bonds, that we make sure we are taking into account our climate resilience and our climate mitigation, our climate resilience, so that when even something like open space purchases, let's make sure we're collaborating across the state to make an open space purchase that is as good for the state in terms of flood mitigation, protection, all those sorts of things, in addition to being a great place for people to go out and use that space. So it's those kinds of things I want to see. I do want to also emphasize the other kind of big piece of the bill that I think is one that helps to set the stage, is also sets targets for what we want to see our carbon emissions reach in the years 2025, 2035, and 2050, so that by 2050 we'd be at an 85% reduction from today's number. I would point out that the Office of Energy Resources in their energy plan has a similar target already. The Eastern Canadian premiers and New England governors have a number of, I think, 75 to 85% as their target they set some 10 years ago. So this number isn't inconsistent with a lot of the other targets. It's also what's in the Massachusetts law that I mentioned that was passed in 2008. So why don't I let Mr. Payne also, though, emphasize some of the other key pieces of the bill, and then I'd be happy to let us have a chance to maybe answer any questions that you might have as committee members. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Payne?
Thank you very much. It's very much a pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to talk about this. First of all, Rhode Island's already doing a pretty good job. That the issue really is that we haven't pulled the pieces together and brought them into a single place and said, here's what we can do, here's what we are doing, and here's how we can move forward. This bill does that. It really is based on existing structures of Rhode Island law. It's not boilerplated from any other jurisdiction. It's based on how Rhode Island currently functions. The bill began with a thorough assessment of all provisions of Rhode Island law that have a bearing on climate change, all provisions. That compilation ran to some 300 pages. It looked at what the issues pertaining to climate change affecting Rhode Island are, and those were really done by a series of listening sessions and work by students at Brown University. It took those two things and brought them together into a first draft that was then widely circulated. That draft was then revised based on current activity in Rhode Island, producing a draft bill which Chairman Handy shepherded into good form and was then presented to Ledge Council, and that's now before you. Significantly, the bill contains findings which tell the story of what's going on in climate change science as that pertains to Rhode Island. It contains purposes, and those are significant because they guide what the agencies are then supposed to do. It provides definitions. Definitions are critical. The difference between the executive order, which is excellent, and this legislation is the executive order doesn't define terms. This bill gives a standard set of definitions for which all entities in Rhode Island can then use. It creates extremely strong expectations for public involvement and community engagement. It pushes things down to the local level. It's not an endpoint where it says, sort of, Father knows best, and we'll tell everybody how to do it. It really says that things will proceed based on public involvement and community engagement, and they will happen at the local level. It keeps science up to date in Rhode Island by having a science advisory panel. It sets measurable goals to which Chairman Handy has alluded. It uses the existing powers of state agencies. And if you look at that, there's a long list on page, beginning at the bottom of page 13 and running through page 14 of the existing authority in state law that can be marshaled in order to address climate change issues. So Rhode Island isn't starting from no place. It actually has a list of existing authority. It asks state agencies with jurisdiction to do the vulnerability assessments, then for state planning to take that work and look at those comprehensively on a geographic and population basis so that communities can then see how vulnerability assessments can affect their own jurisdiction. And then it looks at activity on adaptation at the community and watershed level. It recommends green infrastructure, and it takes a look before you leap approach to issuance of public debt. You wouldn't want to put out a 30-year bond issue without looking at whether something is going to be washed away or made vulnerable in 5 years. It doesn't change the way bonds are issued, but it does say, look at the issues. And it does that by revamping the powers of the Public Finance Management Board, an existing structure. Significantly, the bill doesn't create any new regulatory bureaucracies. It doesn't impose new fee structures or taxes. It stays within existing parameters. This list of things of what it does is pushed through essentially 3 mechanisms. Number one, it creates a new chapter of the general laws with public participation and community involvement as its centerpiece. Second, it creates a new chapter of the general laws pertaining to mitigation, that's reducing greenhouse gases led by DEM, and adaptation, which filters through statewide planning. and it asks state agencies, as I've mentioned, to deal with vulnerability assessments, and it creates an advisory panel with regard to climate change science. And finally, it amends 10 chapters of the general laws in order to have the foregoing put into appropriate places in the existing chapters of the general laws. In other words, this bill, by and large, uses existing Rhode Island structures and helps migrate them into a capacity to address one of the most pressing issues facing us as a political jurisdiction. That's what it does. And it's not anything brand new. It's a use of existing capacities and structures. And if any members have the question about how specific provisions work, you wake up with a question in the middle of the night about that, jot it down, send me an email. I put my email address on my sign-up sheet, and I'd be pleased to respond to you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to work on this.
Questions? I do have a couple more things I wanted to add, but any questions that you folks had?
I believe in planning. And when I was a Boy Scout, our motto is always be prepared. But is there a fiscal note attached to this?
There is not. What I've really worked to do is, and I have asked and in fact, that one of the things I wanted to mention was I've been meeting with the government agencies and things like that, and we are working with them on amendments and that sort of stuff along the way. But I am aware that there is the potential that staffing is going to need to be added, at least in the short term. So there is a possibility that eventually the bill needs to be moved to finance. What we're working to do is have a hearing really vetting it on the environmental issues. But I agree, Rep. Palumbo, that's absolutely something we're going to definitely need to make sure we are checking on before we'd be able to move the bill forward.
My response is you could implement this and it would have great good effect without adding staff. Can you get it all done in a superb way without having a bolus of concerted activity? No. But getting definitions right, setting goals, doing all those things are not don't require staff. So yes, it would benefit enormously by having some staff capacity. Other states are doing it, and if Rhode Island doesn't do it, it will frankly be a laggard. Massachusetts and Connecticut are moving out on these issues. Rhode Island needs to do as well.
And to that effect, I mean, again, I am intending to fight to work to get staffing because I don't want essentially cannibalization to happen where essentially we're taking something from somewhere else that's existing. I do agree with Ken that there are a lot of parts of this bill that do not require new staff to do them because a lot of it is about sort of institutionalizing things. But I think to really be effective, we really do need to see planning, DEM, DOT, and OER and others have the capacity to respond to these things. A couple of things I wanted to also emphasize too is there's no presupposed solutions. That's what Ken, I think, also was sort of getting at. We're not assuming that what the right answers are. Instead, what we want to do is, we are, however, saying climate change is real and we need to respond to it and we need to plan for it. What we're not saying is that a green roof here or that there is the right answer, but rather instead letting the real experts help to figure out what those pieces are, working with a science and a science committee to help figure those things out as we go. And I did also, I know we have, I wanted to frame a couple of things I think people are going to bring up as they come up. I think this is an opportunity for the state as well, as I was saying, but I think we're going to potentially see extra venture capital investment. That's the kind of thing I think Massachusetts has seen since they passed their legislation. I think while a lot of us might think this is more of a sea level rise issue with the shoreline, we know again from the 2010 floods and from things we've seen around the state that this is statewide, and also heat is going to be a piece of this. 80% of the problem, in my opinion, is water, but there's still a substantial issue to think about around heat. I didn't want to forget to mention that. And I also didn't want to forget to thank the folks that have helped me put this together. I neglected to do that when I was starting out, but people like Meg Kerr, Ken Payne, Timmons Roberts, professor from Brown University, a whole bunch of interns have been working with him and helping me work on this over this time frame. Brown University itself also has been incredibly helpful at putting this together. And I want to thank all the folks that have met with us, over the agencies, and I'm hoping we're also going to see people like Gilbane and others also be able to come and speak in favor of this legislation. We'll see who can come in, but we've had a lot of great folks along the way. So thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about it. I printed out these quotes. I want to add this one last thing, because I think this, because you guys are going to be amused by one of the people that wrote one of the quotes. So one was from Buddha that happened to pop out. I don't believe in a fate that falls on men however they act, but I do believe in a fate that falls on them unless they act. And then this one that I think Rep. Newberry would have been amused to hear I was saying, which is, the ladder of success is best climbed by stepping on the rungs of opportunity. And that's Ayn Rand that wrote that one along the way. So, anyway.